Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Ketogenic Fasting Project. This is number 17, and I titled it Poison for All. Talk a lot about how carbohydrates, and in particular refined carbohydrates, are bad for the body, and uh, the sugar in general gets described as a poison. But I wanted to put a few other things on people's radar, things we can talk about in greater depth in the future. But this whole show is about me sharing information I've come across and hopefully inspiring other people to do their homework and spend some time on their health. There's a lot of good information out there, and there's a lot of information that's contrary to what we've been told, and somewhat contrary to intuition. So I wanted to run over some other items that have to do with diet, which could quite easily trip you up on a ketogenic diet. Sugar, of course, and then there's lectins. Lectins are proteins. The most famous lectin of all, of course, is gluten. We hear a lot about gluten intolerance and celiac disease and stuff like that. And a lot of people are showing gluten intolerance, but not necessarily having celiac disease. And there's a lot of debate as to why that is. Is it just an overexposure to gluten? Is the gluten has changed? Is it that the gluten is combined with other foods? There's a number of additives, particularly in breads, that aren't even listed on labels by law, which could be causing the symptoms. And then another one is oils. When they told us to take animal fat out of our diets, well, it started before I was born, but I started offering up oils, primarily vegetable oils or seed oils or nut oils, as replacements. But they're problematic for a number of reasons. One of those reasons is some of them are converted into trans fats, which means they add hydrogen, they bubble hydrogen in there to stabilize it. They're adding free hydrogen ions onto the fats so that they don't absorb oxygen, and it also makes them more rigid at room temperature. So your typical example is like Crisco or margarine or whatever. And I always thought it was fascinating. Crisco stands for crystallized cottonseed oil. Now, who ever thought we were supposed to be eating cottonseed oil? I'm sure it's a lot easier to sell the idea of eating something like corn oil as opposed to cottonseed oil, because at least we eat corn. But then you got to wonder where do they get all the oil out of the corn? When was the last time you ate a ear of corn and it was oily? And then another danger is plastics. There's a lot of chemicals in plastics. There's a lot of talk about the chemicals in Teflon and BPA. There's a lot of BPA free plastic water jugs and stuff out there, but a lot of people don't realize that metal cans are often lined with plastic, and there's BPA in that plastic. And there's a number of other chemicals that I'm not going to get into in this podcast, but suffice to say, they have effects like estrogen. They're essentially what they call xenoestrogens, and some of them are, interrupt other processes in the body, but they can directly cause you to gain weight. They can interrupt pathways and all sorts of stuff. And then, of course, there's medications. I mean, we all know medications can be dangerous, and we all know that, we hear a lot about how antibiotics are misused, overprescribed, and then people don't take the full course, and on and on and on. So, but they cause other problems as well that you may not have heard of. Sugar, of course, we wind up with high blood sugar and a lot of sugar in the tissue, which creates a problem in itself. But when you realize that your entire digestive tract is lined with a layer, a barrier that's only about one cell thick, all this stuff that you swallow has to come in contact with that layer, and if that layer gets holes in it, you get what they call leaky gut syndrome. And then essentially food passes through in forms that the body the body is not adapted to, or, and it sees it as an invader. Normally you eat your food, you chew it up real good, it hits that stomach acid, it breaks down, and then it gets to the microbes in the lining of the rest of the digestive tract, and they take it apart. They take proteins apart into amino acids and pass them through the lining. They take fats apart and break them down into little fatty acid groups and pass them through, and so on and so forth. Carbohydrates are broken down into sugars, and that energy is then passed through into the bloodstream in small discrete packages. But when you get holes, you get chunks of protein or waste material from the bacteria getting into the bloodstream, and then your immune system goes haywire, thinking that it's being invaded when it's really just food floating around. In a general sense, it lowers the tissue quality in your body. This is one of the reasons why joint problems are so prevalent these days. I was shocked when I was in my 30s and I found out how many of my friends had high blood pressure, and then I got into my 40s and I couldn't believe how many people were having knees and hips replaced, how many people are having problems with elbows and necks and shoulders. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that the quality of the tissue of our bodies isn't as durable. That's why kids are having so many more problems. It all comes down to these issues with food above and beyond just the exposure to sugar and in excess carbohydrates. And I mentioned the hydrogenated vegetable oil. A lot of times the hydrogenated vegetable oil, over eating it for decades, accumulates in the body and actually becomes incorporated into cell walls. But because it's the wrong material, nutrients can't pass through the cell wall like they normally would, because you essentially have, shall we say, you've got a plastic tarp over part of your cell that should be living tissue. And so it's kind of an analogy for what's going on. And then of course, chemicals in the plastic like BPA, like I said, they act like estrogen quite frequently, and you'll find that aside from those xenoestrogens like that in plastic, you'll also find that soy products contain a lot of phytoestrogen, which is a plant-based estrogen, which has not only been associated with weight gain in general, but it's also been demonstrated in studies to be damaging to the hearts of males. Not sure what it does to females, other than it's suspected of bringing on puberty earlier. So accumulation of antibiotics and other medications are now being linked to things like IBS, Crohn's disease, and colitis. You can imagine what it's like when you start perforating the lining of your digestive tract. All kinds of things can go wrong. A number of foods like lectins are being strongly linked to acid reflux and GERD, and then the medications that are prescribed for primarily the proton inhibitors or proton pump inhibitors that lower stomach acid are known to cause more problems and trigger more autoimmune diseases. Some of these autoimmune diseases manifest in the form of asthma or hay fever, arthritis, eczema, psoriasis, and in more severe cases, things like lupus and MS. So the problem with a lot of seed and nut oils is that they oxidize easily. Once they're squeezed out, they come in contact with the air. They absorb oxygen, and they essentially start becoming rancid, which isn't good for you. In addition to that, they tend to contain a lot of omega-6 fatty acid, which in itself isn't bad, but we tend to have too much of it, and we tend to have an imbalance between omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acid, omega-3s being the harder one to get. And when you have excess omega-6 fatty acid, it tends to cause inflammation, it tends to trigger autoimmune diseases and so forth. And then NSAIDs. NSAIDs are like your acetaminophen, your naproxen, that's Tylenol, and Aleve. ibuprofen. These are also known to perforate the lining of your digestive tract and trigger um, autoimmune diseases. I know in my case, I was taking naproxen for my joint pain because I had arthritis, and it made my psoriasis worse. I asked my doctor, I was like, oh, I'm taking this stuff like every other day, and he's like, oh, don't worry about it. I got patients that take it 6 times a day. And one of the nice things about naproxen or Aleve was that like I had to take it once a day, and I was good. And I'm thinking, man, people are taking 6 doses a day. That's ridiculous. I can't imagine how bad a shape they're probably in. But this is all in the literature. This isn't like some sort of conspiracy theory. It's well known that these remedies cause these problems, and in a way, it could be the snake eating its own tail. You take it because you got some pain, which would normally be temporary, and you start taking these NSAIDs, and it causes more pain. So your pain goes away, it comes back. You take more, it comes back worse, and it progressively gets worse. And of course, now we're finding out that even just aspirin can do this, and aspirin is known to really damage not just the upper and lower intestine, but also the lining of the stomach. So it's not something you really ought to be taking every day. I know that they believe it gives people who are at risk of having heart attacks an advantage, but you might want to seriously read up on it if you're taking that every day, even a small dose. And of course, antibiotics can wipe out the good bugs in your stomach, your microbiome. Sometimes certain strains never recover, especially in children. And so you're losing a large part of your immune system every time one of these strains of bacteria or gut flora is wiped out and doesn't come back. Now you can take prebiotics and probiotics that help these things like yogurt and other fermented foods, and I don't have a problem with that. I do have a problem when people start taking them every day forever, because in theory you should be able to get these colonies of microbiome to start flourishing in your intestinal tract. And if you're eating well and not taking a bunch of medication every day, you shouldn't need to replenish that. It should grow and stay in balance on its own. If you're feeding certain types, certain strains over and over again, they're going to overwhelm some of the other ones you're not eating, because yogurt does not contain more than 1 or 2 strains usually, and you have like 10,000. So you can create a problem by overdoing it. And then grains, fruit, both contain lectins. Grains seem to be, and part of the problem is not just the lectins themselves, but everybody thinks that whole wheat bread is so much better for you. But the outside casing that they're leaving on in there can be just as hard on the lining of your digestive tract as the rest of the lectins are, like the gluten, which is inside. So grain in itself is a lot more problematic than just containing gluten or containing lectins, and more people are finding out by doing testing that these foods are triggering things like lupus. And of course, I probably don't have to tell you that hormones are going to create a problem. We're seeing a rise of hormones in the drinking water. There's concerns about it in animals. I know there's gradually been stricter and stricter laws about feeding hormones to and antibiotics to animals. So hopefully that's getting better, but you got to remember, plants generate them, plastics contain them. So if you want to have a healthy long life, it's not enough just to eat the right foods. You got to get rid of things like this in your environment. That's one of the reasons why I switched to glass containers. Like, bring a lunch with me to work every day, and I pack it in glass containers. I cook it in glass or stainless steel. So. And then I already mentioned the hydrogenated oils. They not only leave hydrogenated vegetable oil in your body, because your body doesn't break it down very well, because you don't have any enzymes for hydrogenated oil. A lot of times people will produce more stomach acid, and if you already have a problem with the acid reflux, you're just going to exacerbate it by eating something that's almost indigestible and one that actually lingers in your body. I know that was a trigger for me. You go eat a donut and you get heartburn, guess why? So a lot of these foods affect your autoimmune system by agitating it with frequently by penetrating the lining of your digestive tract, but also by throwing off your microbiome or killing off the uh, the the bacteria that you want, or the intestinal flora that you want to digest your food. It throws it out of whack, and sometimes the bacteria will migrate into other sections of your digestive tract where they're not really supposed to be. So that's why these are poisons for everybody. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for watching. Please subscribe to my channel, and I sincerely hope this helps somebody out there.